waiting for her. What happens when the past is no longer a memory, but a battle? When her mother's death raises more questions than answers, and when Dylan, the man who tried to ruin her, holds the key to her inheritance and her future. With everything on the line, Chloe must fight for what's hers, but the cost could be more than she's ready to pay. Will she reclaim her life, or lose it all to the dark forces trying to control her? Let us know in the comments. How far would you go to expose the truth? Let us begin. Chloe stood on her balcony, the vast skyline of the city stretching before her. The lights shimmered like stars in the distance, reminding her of how far she had come. She had built a life in this city, a life that was hers, free from the past. As she breathed in the cool night air, her thoughts wandered back to the chaos she had once known. Dylan, the man who had nearly destroyed her, haunted her memories, and her mother, who had always taken Dylan's side, blaming Chloe for leaving him, was a woman she could never reconcile with. Her phone buzzed, slicing through the tranquility. Chloe hesitated before picking it up, a sense of foreboding washing over her. The call that followed shattered her carefully constructed peace. Her mother, the woman who had never understood her, had passed away. Chloe didn't cry. She hadn't cried when she left Dylan, and she wouldn't cry now, but the floodgates of old wounds creaked open. It was hard to avoid the sting, the weight of an unresolved relationship, the fear of returning to the place she'd escaped. Still, Chloe knew that this was a call she couldn't ignore. She had to go back to the small town where her life had been marred by betrayal and pain. Packing her suitcase was not an easy task. Chloe stood in front of the mirror, surveying the woman in front of her. Her medium-length curls, now tamed into a neat afro, framed a face that carried the scars of years of trauma, but also the strength she had earned. Her dark brown eyes reflected the resilience she had nurtured. The woman in the mirror was no longer the scared girl who had run from Dylan. She was someone different, someone stronger. As Chloe folded the clothes into her suitcase, her mind wandered back to the last time she had been in her hometown. It felt like a lifetime ago, before she had established herself in the city, before the pain of betrayal had pushed her to start over. Back then, Chloe had been naive, afraid of stepping out of the shadows her mother cast. But now, as she stood on the precipice of returning, she could feel that same fear bubbling to the surface. She had healed, yes, but the wounds still festered under the surface. Would she be able to keep her composure in the town that had never embraced her? The flight back to her hometown was long. Each mile felt like a return to the old shackles, but Chloe fought to hold her head high. She couldn't let her past define her. The inheritance, the reason she was forced to return, would be the final piece she needed to truly break free from everything she had endured. She had worked hard for the life she had built, away from Dylan and the toxic influence of her family. But now, she was being pulled back to the darkness she had escaped. On the plane, Chloe closed her eyes for a moment, but the memories came flooding back. She remembered the arguments with her mother, the cold, judgmental words that had pierced her heart over the years. She remembered the nights she spent in the dark, comforting herself, pushing down the suffocating feelings of inadequacy. Dylan had been a master of manipulation, and her mother had always been his unwitting accomplice. It was a cycle that Chloe had sworn she would never let repeat itself. But the call had come, and now she had to face the truth. She wasn't just going back to settle an inheritance. She was going back to face the woman who had never understood her, and to confront the man who had nearly destroyed her life. The fear of the past tugged at her, but Chloe held her ground. She was no longer the girl who had run away in the dead of night. She was the woman who had rebuilt her life. AI image prompt. Chloe standing on a balcony overlooking a bustling city, the lights in the distance reflecting her personal journey. Her expression is somber but determined, her curly hair gently blowing in the wind. the sunset casting a warm glow over the scene. The sense of solitude is palpable, despite the city's busy life. The law office was sterile and cold, filled with shelves of legal books that held the power to shape Chloe's future. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floor as she made her way to the conference room, her heart beating faster with every step. Her childhood town now felt foreign, a stark contrast to the confident businesswoman she had become. But as she opened the door, Chloe was struck by the weight of the moment. It was impossible to separate the woman sitting across from her, the lawyer, from the man she had left behind. The lawyer gestured for Chloe to sit. He shuffled the papers in front of him before handing her the will. Chloe braced herself for what was to come. The pages were thick, filled with legal jargon and signatures, but nothing could have prepared her for what she read next. Her mother's estate was immense, far larger than Chloe could have imagined. The luxurious homes, the hidden assets, the offshore accounts, it was a fortune beyond anything Chloe could fathom. She had never truly understood her mother's wealth. While her mother had always been distant, Chloe had assumed the estate was modest. After all, her mother had never spent the money on her. There had always been a quiet tension around it. But the stipulation was even more shocking. To inherit, Chloe had to prove that she was mentally capable. The words cut deep, as if her mother's lingering control had manifested in her final decision. Chloe's heart pounded as the weight of those words sank in. It felt like the ultimate betrayal, yet it also made sense. Her mother had always doubted her, always favored Dylan over her, and now, even in death, she was using her power to dictate Chloe's future. And then Chloe's eyes fell on the final twist, the name that made her stomach churn. Dylan, the man who had been the architect of so much pain in her life, the man who had manipulated her for years, was now her mother's lawyer. The realization struck like a blow to the chest. He held her fate in his hands, and Chloe had no choice but to fight. Chloe closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. She had fought so hard to escape him, to rebuild her life, but now he was in her path again. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this battle, but she had no choice. The stakes were higher than ever, and Dylan would stop at nothing to keep her from inheriting what was rightfully hers. She needed to act quickly. There was no time for hesitation. Chloe knew that if she didn't play this game on her terms, she would lose everything. Her mind raced as she tried to formulate a plan. She had always been one step ahead of Dylan before. She would have to do it again, but this time, she wasn't just fighting for her future. She was fighting for her sanity, for her ability to finally take control of her life without him looming over her. The lawyer's voice broke her reverie. "We will need to start the proceedings soon," he said. "It's a complicated matter, and with Dylan being so deeply involved, I suggest you prepare yourself for a long battle." Chloe nodded silently, her mind already spinning with the steps she would take. She had survived worse than this. She wasn't going to let Dylan win. The courtroom was filled with an air of hostility. The cold, sterile walls seemed to amplify every heartbeat, every breath. Chloe sat at the table, her fingers gripping the edge, trying to steady her pulse. The weight of the past pressed heavily on her shoulders. She had been in many boardrooms, had faced numerous adversaries in her career, but this was different. Here, sitting across from her, was Dylan, the man who had once broken her, who had twisted every ounce of her self-worth. He was no longer the man she had fallen for. Now he was the predator, the manipulator who had destroyed her sense of self. His presence in the courtroom was suffocating. Every move he made, every word he spoke, was designed to undermine her. The smooth, confident voice that had once charmed her now grated on her nerves, each syllable a reminder of his deceit. Dylan wasted no time launching into his accusations. He painted Chloe as unstable, too emotional, too unpredictable to handle her mother's estate. He dredged up her history with him, using the darkest parts of their relationship as weapons. Her past, her weaknesses, were now ammunition for him to claim victory. He spoke of Chloe's escape from their relationship in a way that made her seem weak and fragile, as though her departure was an act of desperation rather than survival. Chloe felt every word like a slap, but she refused to let him see her pain. She took a deep breath, her body stiffening, her gaze never wavering. She had come a long way from the woman who had run from him all those years ago. This was her fight now. When it was her turn to speak, Chloe stood tall, the clack of her heels on the courtroom floor echoing like a drumbeat in the silence. Her voice rang out, steady and calm, as she recounted her journey, the struggles, the strength, the success. She spoke of the business she had built from scratch, of the obstacles she had faced without his help. Each word she spoke was a testament to her resilience. With every piece of evidence she presented, Chloe felt the power returning to her. The courtroom grew tense, the weight of the past pressing on Chloe's shoulders. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her composure. She wasn't just fighting for money, she was fighting for her dignity, her independence, her future. The days following the courtroom were a blur. Chloe couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. The weight of the case, of the unresolved emotions, was overwhelming. The anger she had suppressed for so long bubbled to the surface, threatening to consume her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Dylan's face, his smug expression, his cold demeanor. It was as if he was still controlling her, even from a distance. But there was no time to dwell on the past. Chloe had to stay focused. She couldn't let him win, but as the tension grew, so did the cracks in her resolve. She hadn't expected the case to be easy, but she also hadn't expected Dylan's manipulation to be so relentless. He knew her weaknesses, and he wasn't afraid to exploit them. Just as Chloe was about to give in to the exhaustion, the private investigator called. His voice was strained, his words urgent. "Chloe, I've found something. Something you need to see." Chloe's pulse quickened as she rushed to meet him. The investigator was waiting in a small, dimly lit office. He slid a manila envelope across the table, his eyes glinting with caution. "Your mother's death wasn't an accident," he said, his voice low. "It was staged." Chloe froze, the words hitting her like a freight train. She had suspected something, but this was confirmation. Dylan had been involved in her mother's death, but to what extent? The private investigator's eyes darkened as he spoke. "I've traced some unusual transactions. Large sums of money were transferred to a company owned by someone close to Dylan. The night before your mother passed, he was seen leaving her house. Chloe, I don't think it was a coincidence." Chloe's stomach turned. The walls seemed to close in around her as the magnitude of the situation sank in. Her mother's death, sudden, unexpected, had never felt right. Now it seemed that Dylan had been involved in something far more sinister than just a fight over money. Her mind raced as she tried to piece the information together. Dylan wasn't just after her mother's wealth. He was after her life. He had been manipulating her, controlling everything, and now it seemed like his machinations had taken a darker turn. Chloe's instincts screamed at her to be careful. Dylan was dangerous, more dangerous than she had ever realized. With this new information, the stakes were raised higher than ever. Chloe couldn't afford to play by the rules anymore. She needed to expose him, to take him down before he could destroy everything she had worked for. The inheritance, the estate, it all suddenly seemed so trivial compared to the real danger Dylan posed. Chloe's hands trembled as she looked at the envelope in front of her. This was her chance to finally take control, to bring Dylan's web of lies to light. She couldn't back down now. The game had changed, and it was time to take the fight to him. Chloe's hands shook as she sifted through the documents, each piece of evidence more damning than the last. She was on the verge of uncovering the full extent of Dylan's betrayal, but every discovery made her stomach churn. Her mother had been a pawn in a much larger scheme, a puppet in Dylan's twisted game. The realization hit Chloe like a cold wave, chilling her to the core. With each new piece of evidence, the weight of the case grew heavier. Dylan had been using her mother's estate to manipulate powerful people, funneling money through illegal channels, and now it seemed that her mother's death had been the final piece of his plan. Chloe's mind raced, her thoughts spinning out of control. She couldn't let him get away with it, not now, not ever. But the deeper Chloe dug, the more dangerous the situation became. Dylan was connected to a shadowy network of criminals, and now Chloe feared that her own safety was at risk. She had to move quickly. Every moment spent in this town was another moment Dylan could use to his advantage. Chloe couldn't afford to hesitate. Her emotions were a whirlwind. Anger, fear, and determination all blended together, creating a storm of feelings that threatened to consume her. She had always been the strong one, the one who had rebuilt her life after escaping Dylan. But now, she wasn't just fighting for her future, she was fighting for her very life. Chloe closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. She was so close to the truth, but the cost of finding it was beginning to feel too high. She couldn't back down now. Her mother's death, her inheritance, everything had led to this moment, and she wasn't going to let Dylan win. Chloe's days had blurred together, a series of sleepless nights and tense meetings, each one more frustrating than the last. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from her lawyer, her private investigator, and her business partner, yet none of them seemed to matter. The case had taken over her life, and with it, every ounce of energy she had. The deeper Chloe dug into Dylan's actions, the more dangerous the web seemed to become. Her mother's death was no longer just a family tragedy. It was a meticulously orchestrated event, one that had set the stage for Dylan's ultimate control over the inheritance. The more Chloe uncovered, the clearer it became that Dylan had planned this for years. She couldn't shake the feeling that Dylan was always one step ahead of her. Every time she thought she had the upper hand, he pulled another string, manipulating the situation to his advantage. The man had always been a master of control, and it seemed that even now, he was still pulling the strings behind the scenes. Chloe sat at her desk, papers scattered around her like a battlefield. The silence of the room was deafening, the only sound the faint hum of the city below. She stared at the evidence in front of her, trying to piece it together. Large sums of money had been moved into offshore accounts, money that didn't belong to her mother. Dylan had been funneling the estate's wealth into hidden assets, using it to build connections with dangerous people. He had manipulated her mother's trust, used her vulnerability to cover his tracks. The walls of her office seemed to close in on her as the enormity of the situation sank in. Dylan was more dangerous than she had ever imagined. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a fight for her life. Chloe had always prided herself on her ability to remain calm under pressure, but now the pressure felt unbearable. The stakes had been raised higher than she ever anticipated. Her phone rang again. It was the private investigator, his voice tense. "Chloe, we've found something. Someone from Dylan's past. A woman. I think she may have information that can help us." Chloe's pulse quickened. "Who is she?" Her voice was steady, but inside, she was racing with possibilities. Who could have been close to Dylan, and why would they be coming forward now? "We're meeting her tonight. She wants to talk to you, but we need to be cautious. Dylan's people are everywhere. This could get dangerous." Danger. The word echoed in Chloe's mind, a constant reminder of the peril she was facing, but she couldn't stop now. Not when she was so close. She had to know the truth. She had to stop Dylan before he destroyed everything she had worked for. As Chloe prepared to leave, she glanced at her reflection in the glass of her office window. Her face was tired, drawn. The woman she saw was different from the one who had left this town years ago. She had been scarred, but she had also become stronger. The fear was still there, but now it was tempered with determination. She had a new purpose, one that wasn't just about proving her worth or reclaiming the inheritance. It was about survival. The air was thick with tension as Chloe stepped into the meeting room, her eyes scanning the shadowy corners of the dimly lit bar. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the calm facade she was trying to maintain. The private investigator, Greg, was seated at a small table in the back, his face hidden in the low light. He had told her to come alone, but the hairs on the back of Chloe's neck stood up, a silent warning that danger was closer than she liked. The woman Greg had mentioned was supposed to be a former acquaintance of Dylan's, someone who might know things Chloe needed to hear, but something about the situation didn't sit right with her. Dylan's world was filled with manipulation, lies, and danger. This woman could be another one of his pawns, or worse, someone working for him in the shadows. "Chloe," Greg's voice broke through her thoughts as he motioned to the woman seated across from him. She was slender, dressed in dark clothing, her face partially obscured by a hood. Her eyes were wide and frantic, and she looked around as if checking for anyone watching. Chloe's pulse quickened. There was a story here, a story that had yet to be told. She slid into the seat opposite the woman, her gaze locked onto the stranger's eyes. "You wanted to talk," Chloe said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. She couldn't afford to be reckless now, not with everything on the line. The woman nodded, her lips trembling. I know what happened. I know what Dylan did. He's dangerous. He's going to destroy you, Chloe. He's been planning it all along." Chloe leaned in, her mind racing. "What do you mean? What do you know about my mother's death?" The woman took a deep breath, then began to speak in hushed tones. She told Chloe about how Dylan had been involved with a group of corrupt businessmen, how he had been using his connections to launder money through the estate. But the most chilling part was when she revealed that Dylan had been in contact with people who could eliminate obstacles, permanent obstacles. "Your mother?" The woman hesitated, her eyes darting nervously. She was an obstacle to him. She knew too much, and when she found out about the fraud, Dylan couldn't let her live. It wasn't just about the money, it was about power. He killed her to keep everything under his control. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. Her mother had been murdered, and Dylan was responsible. The room seemed to spin as Chloe processed the information. The weight of it all hit her like a wave, and for a moment she thought she might collapse. But she couldn't. Not now. Dylan had crossed a line. He had gone too far, and this was no longer just about money or an inheritance. It was about justice. Greg noticed Chloe's pallor, his voice low. "We need to leave, now!" But as Chloe stood up to leave, the sound of footsteps echoed behind her. A dark figure emerged from the shadows. Dylan's men. Chloe's heart pounded in her chest. They had found her. The danger was real, and there was no turning back now. Chloe's pulse raced as she stepped into the cold, damp night, the faint sound of footsteps echoing behind her. The air was thick with danger. She had barely made it out of the bar, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to steady her breath. The dark figure that had emerged from the shadows wasn't just any random stranger. It was someone who had been watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike. Greg moved swiftly beside her, guiding her through the maze of alleyways. His voice was calm, but Chloe could hear the tension in his tone. "We're not safe here. Keep moving." Chloe glanced back, her mind spinning with the revelation the woman had just given her. Dylan hadn't just stolen her inheritance. He had killed her mother. He had orchestrated the entire thing, manipulating everyone around him to serve his twisted desires. And now, He was coming for Chloe. The realization hit her with full force. Dylan had killed her mother to protect his empire. He had used her trust, her vulnerability, and her death to keep control of everything. Chloe had spent years thinking her mother had been an innocent victim in this twisted game, but the truth was far worse. Her mother had known too much, and that knowledge had sealed her fate. As Chloe and Greg rounded a corner, a car pulled up in front of them. The headlights illuminated their path, casting long shadows on the pavement. Chloe tensed, instinctively ready to run, but Greg grabbed her arm, holding her back. "Get in," he said urgently. "We need to move fast." They slid into the back seat of the car, and Greg's voice was a low murmur in Chloe's ear. "We've got what we need, Chloe. We've got proof now. The woman wasn't just a bystander. She's got the key to taking Dylan down. Her testimony, the evidence she's kept hidden." Chloe's heart skipped a beat. This was it. They had the information they needed to expose Dylan, to bring him down once and for all. But as the car sped through the streets, Chloe's mind raced. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about justice for her mother, for all the women Dylan had manipulated, all the lives he had destroyed in his pursuit of power. But she couldn't stop. Not now. She had to keep moving forward. Every step she took brought her closer to the truth, and every obstacle she overcame made her more determined. Suddenly, the car swerved, the tires screeching against the asphalt. Chloe's heart dropped into her stomach as she was thrown against the seat. "What the hell?" Greg started, but the words were cut off by the sound of gunfire. The back window shattered, glass spraying across the car. Chloe ducked instinctively, her heart pounding in her ears. Another shot rang out, the sound deafening in the confined space. Greg cursed under his breath, his hands gripping the wheel tightly as he swerved the car into a narrow alley. "Hold on!" Greg shouted, his voice tight with panic. Chloe's mind raced as the car careened through the alley, the sound of tires screeching against the concrete echoing through the night. The gunshots continued, but Chloe knew they weren't safe yet. They were being hunted by Dylan's men. Greg slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt just as they reached a dead end. Chloe's heart was in her throat as she grabbed for the door handle, ready to get out and run, but the sound of footsteps approaching made her freeze. They were close, too close. The silence that followed the chaos of the chase was deafening. Chloe's breath came in short, sharp gasps as she crouched low in the back seat of the car, listening to the sound of footsteps drawing closer. She could hear them, the men who had been sent to eliminate her, their boots hitting the pavement like a countdown to her impending fate. Greg was the first to act. He slid out of the car, moving swiftly and silently, his footsteps barely audible on the wet ground. Chloe followed, her body shaking with adrenaline. Her mind was focused on one thing: survival. The alley was dark, a narrow passageway that felt like a trap. Chloe's heart pounded in her chest as she crouched behind the car, every muscle tense, ready to spring into action. The men weren't far behind. They were closing in. Chloe glanced at Greg, his face hard with determination. "We need to take them down before they get to us," he whispered. Chloe nodded, her mind already calculating the steps they needed to take. She had been through worse. She had faced betrayal, manipulation, and heartbreak. But this was different. Dylan had crossed a line, and now he would pay for it. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and Chloe knew time was running out. With a swift motion, she pulled out the gun Greg had given her earlier. Her hands were steady, her mind focused. This wasn't just about protecting herself anymore. It was about taking control of her fate, about confronting the man who had destroyed everything she held dear. "Stay low," Greg whispered, his voice filled with urgency. "We move on 3. Chloe's heart was a drumbeat in her ears as they prepared for the final confrontation. She had spent so long running from Dylan, hiding from the truth, But now she was ready to face him. This was the moment that would change everything. 3! Greg's voice barely reached Chloe's ears. Before he could finish, the first of Dylan's men rounded the corner, his gun raised. Chloe moved without thinking, the adrenaline coursing through her veins as she dove into action. With precision, she aimed the gun, her hands steady despite the chaos. The shot rang out, and the man collapsed to the ground with a thud. The other men reacted instantly, diving for cover, but Chloe was already on the move, her heart racing as she moved swiftly through the alley. Greg followed her lead, covering her back as they moved deeper into the darkness. They couldn't let them escape, not now, not when they were so close to the truth. Chloe could hear the sounds of the men scrambling to regroup, but she didn't stop. She had a mission now, a purpose. The truth would come to light, and Dylan would be held accountable. She wouldn't stop until justice was served. The sounds of chaos still echoed in Chloe's ears as she stood at the entrance of the abandoned warehouse, the wind howling through the cracked windows. She was breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling with every breath. The adrenaline of the past few hours had yet to fade, and the weight of the moment felt heavier than ever. Greg stood beside her, his expression grim, but there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. They had made it. They had taken down the last of Dylan's men, but this wasn't over. Not yet. There was still one final confrontation to face. The man who had caused all this pain, the one who had orchestrated the web of lies, manipulation, and betrayal that had nearly cost Chloe everything. Dylan. The thought of him sent a wave of fury through Chloe's veins. He was hiding somewhere in this warehouse, confident in his power, believing that he had outsmarted everyone. But Chloe wasn't the same woman she had been when she first arrived in this town. She had fought, survived, and now it was time to finish what she had started. She stepped into the shadows of the warehouse, the cold air making her skin prickle. The dim light from the overhead bulbs barely cut through the darkness. Chloe's senses were heightened, every sound amplified, every movement scrutinized. She could feel Dylan's presence in the air. He was close. A sudden noise broke the silence, and Chloe spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. She aimed her gun, her finger steady on the trigger, but it was only Greg. He raised his hands in mock surrender. "Easy," Greg said, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I think we've reached the point where we don't need to shoot each other, don't you?" Chloe didn't smile, but she couldn't help the brief flicker of relief that passed through her. They had made it this far, and she wasn't about to lose her chance now. They continued through the maze of crates and shadows, each step bringing Chloe closer to the final confrontation. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, of her mother, of Dylan's manipulation, of all the things she had lost because of him. But there was also something else, something more powerful, the knowledge that she had fought to survive, that she had fought for justice, and that, in the end, she would reclaim her life. They reached the heart of the warehouse. It was empty, save for a few scattered boxes and crates. But then, from the far corner, a figure stepped into the light. Dylan. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. He hadn't changed. He was still the same man, the same manipulative, dangerous man who had nearly broken her. His eyes locked onto hers, cold and calculating. He didn't flinch, didn't seem surprised to see her standing there. "Well, well, well," Dylan said, his voice smooth and mocking. "I must admit, I didn't expect you to make it this far, but I've always underestimated you, haven't I?" Chloe's hands tightened around the gun. "You're going to pay for what you did. To my mother. To me." Dylan's smile faltered, but he quickly regained his composure. "You don't understand, Chloe. This was never about you. It was about power, about keeping what's mine." Chloe stepped forward, her voice low but filled with conviction. "You never had any control over me, Dylan. Not then, not now. You thought you could break me, You thought you could keep me in your grasp, but I'm not that girl anymore." Dylan's eyes flashed with anger. He took a step toward her, his posture threatening, but Chloe didn't back down. She had fought too hard, sacrificed too much to let him win. "You think you're the one in control?" Chloe's voice was steady, but the fury behind it was undeniable. "You're not. You never were." The sound of sirens in the distance reached their ears, and Dylan's face twisted in frustration. His mind raced. He knew the police were closing in on him. His empire was crumbling. But before he could react, Chloe stepped forward, her voice steady as she spoke the words that would be his undoing. "I have everything on you, Dylan. The transactions, the lies, the murder of my mother. It's all on record. You're done." The weight of Chloe's words seemed to hit him like a physical blow. His arrogance faltered, replaced by fear. He knew she wasn't lying. She had everything: the evidence, the witnesses, the proof that would send him to prison for the rest of his life. A beat passed in silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Dylan's face twisted with rage, but he didn't move. There was nowhere left for him to go. "You'll never get away with this," he spat, his voice filled with venom. But even as he spoke, his confidence was slipping. The walls were closing in, and he knew it. Chloe didn't flinch. "It's over." She didn't need to say another word. Dylan's defeat was clear in his eyes. He had lost. The police arrived moments later, and Dylan was arrested without resistance. The weight of years of manipulation, deceit, and betrayal finally came crashing down. Chloe watched as the man who had tormented her for so long was led away in handcuffs, his power and control crumbling into nothing. As the police car pulled away, Chloe stood there, her body trembling with exhaustion. But there was also a sense of peace that settled over her, a quiet triumph that she had fought for everything she had: her freedom, her future, and her mother's justice. Greg walked up beside her, a rare smile on his face. "You did it." Chloe nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I didn't do it alone, but yes, it's done." For the first time in years, Chloe felt the weight lift from her shoulders. She had survived, and now she was free. The inheritance was hers. But more than that, the life she had fought so hard to build was now within her grasp. She wasn't defined by the past anymore. She had the power to shape her future, and nothing, no one, would take that away from her. As the sun set over the city, Chloe stood tall, ready to face the future with strength and resolve. She had come through the storm, and now she was ready to live the life she had always deserved. Wow, what a ride! If you enjoyed this twist-filled journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Stories by Lane. For more unforgettable drama and surprises, and before you go, tell us, what would you have done in this situation? Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. Thanks for watching, and remember, twists you will not see coming await in every chapter.